Welcome, everybody, to Conduct Detrimental's election night coverage. I've always wanted to say that. On the ballot this year in California are Propositions 26 and 27. Proposition 26 is a ballot initiative that would legalize in-person sports betting at Native American casinos and at several state-licensed horse race tracks. While Proposition 27, on the other hand, is a ballot initiative proposed by DraftKings and FanDuel and a few other online sports betting companies that would legalize online sports betting in California. However, as a result of a barrage of negative advertisements, nearly $600 million has been spent on both initiatives combined, both for and against. Both of these initiatives, Prop 26 and Prop 27, are polling very poorly in the 20s and 30s and are expected to fail when Californians go to the polls on Tuesday, November 8th. Well, how could that be? I mean, until recently, sports betting has been gaining widespread public support, has polled very favorably nationally. Every sports betting ballot initiative that has ever been done in any other state has passed. California is poised to be, the Waterloo for sports betting ballot initiatives. So joining us today to tackle the various legal, political, and practical issues surrounding the legalization of sports betting in California is returning guest Ryan Butler, the editor of iGaming Next and the holder of the very valuable Twitter domain name Butler Bets on Twitter. Are you going to be charged $8 for that, Ryan? Is that the deal?
Boy, that sounds like I will be now from going on. Who knows? I see all these reports on Twitter. As somebody with a coveted, currently blue check mark, it seems that value is going to be diluted, and I don't know if it's going to be worth $8 a month if everybody can get it. So who knows? But yeah, right now I have it. So thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. You've been one of the most prolific journalists and analysts covering the gaming industry, both for sports betting and iGaming. And while this field has grown substantially since the fall of PASPA, you've remained, in my view, the gold standard for gambling industry, sports betting, and iGaming journalism. So it was really, really fantastic to have you back. So before we turn to the subject of sports betting in California, I want to ask you about Twitter, for example. You and I are part of this vast network of like sports betting Twitter, gaming Twitter. Everyone who follows the industry knows that in real time, the fastest, most reliable, maybe not the most reliable, but the go-to source for breaking developments surrounding sports betting, iGaming, and gambling generally is Twitter. Do you expect the coverage of the industry or the work that you and I and many, many others do to change as a result of Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter going forward, looking a year ahead from now? Do you see this basically remaining static, or is the unexpected going to happen and we're going to have to adjust along with everybody else?
I just think at the baseline, we have to be prepared for the unexpected, which isn't necessarily a great answer for it. It is still far, far too early to notice what's going to happen. But also what we do know, Daniel, is that Elon is impulsive. A lot of this is impulsive. Even the purchase of Twitter seemed impulsive in a lot of ways. So a lot of these decisions, it's interesting. The $8 figure came out after a Twitter conversation with Stephen King, the author. He had previously floated $20 a month. Then he goes $8. It just seems that they're kind of button mashing right now. Also, what we've seen over this weekend, maybe the biggest news, is that they have now posted a lot more jobs. After Elon Musk laid off a huge percentage of the workforce, they are now asking some of those same people to come back. They are posting their jobs back up. So it just seems that it's a little bit chaotic right now. We don't know how long-term this is going to look. I am looking and kind of evaluating, are there other media accounts? Are there going to be other platforms? If there is a mass departure from the Twitter platform for whatever reason, that's going to have to go somewhere else. So I am, getting ready for it. I just don't know what that's going to look like now. For at the moment, it's still status quo for me, at least.
That's a pretty smart answer. I think, by and large, the changes are going to, be relating to, new types of services. I think, by and large, the mass around, gaming Twitter and sports law Twitter and sports Twitter is going to largely remain the same. But it remains to be seen what kind of chaos ensues over the course of the next year. So turning to California, the polls are looking pretty bad for both Proposition 26 and Proposition 27. Yet you're in Los Angeles right now covering the results of the sports betting ballot initiatives. You must have been sent there in the hope that there would be a celebration around sports betting finally coming to California. So why are you in California, and what are you hearing, the latest on where these propositions are both headed?
This had been planned months and months in advance, this trip, when we were much more optimistic about this happening. Again, yeah, Daniel, you cannot stress how bad the polling is. Not only is it polling at 2030 approval, you have to look at these polls are usually conducted yes, no, undecided. The fact is that we now have hard no's, especially for Prop 27, the online one. When a majority is already saying no, 55% or so says no, that means if every undecided broke your way, you would still lose. So I mean, that's just horrendous. It's going very, very poorly. I was hoping or thinking maybe there'd be a victory type party. This has happened a lot in elections. There's the galvanizing and all that. That is just not going to happen. One of the biggest things, DraftKings and FanDuel, which have been the biggest financial backers of this initiative, as well as those are the bigger two. BetMGM, Penn Entertainment, which is Barstool, Wynn, Bet Fanatics, Bally's have also contributed at least 7 figures, 8 figures to this campaign. But those two have already, DraftKings and FanDuel, their executives have already basically, in so many words, said it's done. And when your biggest backers are pretty much saying that it's over, it's over. So there is just realistically no way there's going to be a celebration here in Los Angeles. They have pulled advertising already. I've been here on the ground for a little bit. I'm always paying attention to TV. We've only had one campaign ad for this topic when there's been it's all campaign ads now, and it was a no on 27. There is very little, there's basically nothing less for the pro online initiative. So yeah, but again, hey Daniel, I'm in Los Angeles. It's lovely here as always. Never regret a trip out here. So at least there's some positives with that respect.
I want to focus on the advertising. Have the tribes likewise curtailed their spending, or have they kept going pedal to the metal, even though DraftKings and FanDuel and all the other companies have curtailed their television advertising? Where are the tribes right now in terms of the spend and continuing to press ahead? Because we've seen cases. Hillary Clinton took her foot off the gas in 2016, that was way ahead in every poll. And in my view, she didn't campaign hard enough and let Donald Trump overtake her at the end. Are the tribes keeping up the pressure in the court of public opinion?
So they're not letting go. The spending, I'd have to double check how much has gone with it. They have already spent more than $100 million just on the No on 27 campaign. So actually, it's interesting. The tribes really, the 26, which was their, one they backed, which would be as you mentioned, the retail sports books at tribal casinos, a couple horse tracks. Also, very critically, one an underappreciated thing, that 26 would also give them a more expanded gaming options, as well as chances and more legal ability to go after card rooms, which is almost a separate important topic. But the tribes have been in legal battles over the definition of card games for 2 decades plus now. So this would give them another legal avenue to go after and challenge those card rooms. So anyway, we can talk about that as well. But yeah, so they're continuing to go forward with it. But again, it's not so much pro 26, it's anti 27. They have been benefited as well by the support of both political parties. Governor Gavin Newsom, to be candid, I think reading the political tea leaves, came out a couple weeks ago against online sports betting Prop 27. So they're continuing to go no, 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 no on 27. For the tribes, it's very, very important. They are using terms of just extreme, significance, that they are viewing 27 as a threat to their livelihood, as a threat to their people, their cultures, their future. So they are being very, very aggressive. 26 they want, sure, but to them, the threat of 27 is so great of online sports betting that they are putting everything behind it, politically, financially, every way they can to make sure that doesn't happen.
Ryan, let's drill down on this a little bit. The tribes portray this as a threat to their sovereignty, yet Proposition 27 requires every online sports betting platform to go through a Native American tribe, meaning nobody can accept or take a wager over the internet unless they've got a market access deal with one of the Indian tribes in California. And then the tribes also have a formidable land-based casino operation. They have a monopoly over slot machines and several different types of casino style games. There's no one else who operates casino style games in California. Arguably, you can maybe make a case that the card rooms might infringe upon that a little bit.
The tribes would argue very much that it infringes. So it's important to note that. But yeah.
Well, why are they so threatened by the possibility of online sports betting if that has to be run through them and their casino operation exists independent of whatever happens with sports betting? They still have a casino monopoly. Why are they so threatened by this?
This is a great question, Daniel. It's not online sports betting. That doesn't matter. It is that online sports betting will open up online casino gaming, online slots, online table games. There's just that fear that once the sports books are in, once Californians are adjusted to using their phones, If you've been, Danny, we've been to New Jersey, you've seen it there, Pennsylvania, on the sports books, the DraftKings, FanDuel's, the platforms. When you look at the sports book, you want to try to place a bet, it'll hover over it. Hey, you might like blackjack. You want to play blackjack instead of placing this bet? They realize that's where the money is. So that is long term why the tribes view it as an existential threat, is the idea that online casino gaming would come. In California, a lot of the tribes, they do have essentially, they do have a monopoly on slots, they have a monopoly under the law and all that on these games. But it is the fear that most of their casinos are in more rural areas, more remote areas. The idea that if you are not coming to that casino, if you want to gamble at home, that is one of their biggest fears, that long term it'll do it. And to them, at the very least, it was worth galvanizing everybody and spending more than $100 million just to try to stop this.
They're portraying it as a win, and I don't quite see it that way. I mean, one of the pillars of Proposition 26 was not only the retail sports books, but it was also, roulette, craps, and the private attorney general powers to be able to sue or have individuals sue card rooms for allegedly violating California's gaming laws by running these player dealer games, which the tribes are up in arms about. Well, they proposed Prop 26 2 years ago, a year or 2 years ahead of Proposition 27. Why do they view this as a victory? If both 26 and 27 fail, they're still viewing this as a victory for the tribes, even though their original intent was to pass Proposition 26 with retail sports betting, all the other casino style games, as well as a valuable enforcement weapon to use against the card rooms. Why are they discounting that and viewing, is this public relations, or do they truly view this as a win, when the dust settles?
Talking with the tribal leaders, different recently panels at the G2E conference and all that, they absolutely do view this as a huge victory. And again, I appreciate your point with it. There's, if you look at it objectively, you kind of wonder this cataclysmic apocalyptic language they use, but that is how seriously they view this. And that is their perspective. They genuinely think and have portrayed and look at DraftKings and FanDuel and online sports betting coming in as a threat to their sovereignty. I talk about the emotional thing and the generations and the cultures and all that. There is this idea too, California and the tribes in particular, because I think hardened by 20 plus years of these battles with the card rooms. It's interesting. Kamala Harris, the vice president, several other big time officials had to have different rulings while they were the attorneys general of the state. There's been so much back and forth. And it's interesting too, these player banked card games, how they're able to get away with it, circumvent it, and all these different loopholes and all this back and forth and so on and so forth. So anyway, California tribes, they firmly believe a year 2000 constitutional ballot measure that was approved by voters, which did give them that exclusive rights to gaming. They view that anything.
Didn't give them exclusive rights to gaming. It gave the governor of California the authority to enter into gaming compacts with tribes to cover 4 categories of gaming. I think it was lotteries.
That's a good correction. Certain types of gaming, exactly. Well, exclusive over the bigger ones.
The exclusivity, I think, comes into play in the compacts that were eventually negotiated that gave the tribes exclusivity over those specific Class 3 categories of games that entail slot machines, lotteries, and banked and percentage card games. It did not grant the tribes exclusivity over anything else. I guess that's a point that people can debate. But let's sort of diagnose what went wrong or what led to the failure or expected failure of both Proposition and 27. If you could pinpoint where things sort of went sideways, where do you see the major reasons as to why both of these initiatives are going to fail? Is it just simply 2 and it's mutually assured just because you have 2, or is there something a little bit deeper than that?
That is part of it. It was confusing that there was 2 of them. The turning moment, and again, according to this is the tribal perspective, but part of the massive spending DraftKings and FanDuel and the online backers put into this was including billboards near near tribal lands saying tribes support 27. A handful of tribes supported 27. Absolutely. These were some of the smaller ones. It's also, again, Daniel, we've talked about it too. It's so important when we say tribal gaming, tribes are not homogenous. They also have very different priorities. They have very different cultures and histories and everything else, different assets. California, similar to many other tribal gaming states, has several very large, very, very successful tribes and a bunch of much smaller ones that a casino is, it's a much smaller gaming entity, not a billion-dollar operation. Where we live in Florida, obviously Seminoles are an example of one of the big ones. California has a few tribes like that. But anyway, so a few of the smaller tribes did jump in on 27, supporting it. And the DraftKings and FanDuel and all them took that and ran with it. in the eyes of many of the tribes way too far by putting up these billboards saying tribe supported. They said that actually galvanized a lot of the tribes, all the ones that weren't supporting it explicitly. This got them fired up. This galvanized them. California tribes do have a lot of political support from just neutral parties, your average voter in Florida. There is a lot of backing. There's a lot of support for them too. So the tribes are able to use this as fuel, plus their financial resources, plus all that. So there's that one reason is part of why the tribes are so successful. The second one is an interesting approach. So in Arkansas, a state that we mentioned is one of the states that approved casino gaming and sports betting as a part of that. When they in 2018, they had their ballot measure. They phrased that, their supporters entirely phrased it as a chance to build revenues for new roads. So I still remember these ads very distinctly. It was just funny where it was just, hey, Arkansas, you want better roads, right? Vote yes on 4. And at the very end, it would go, voting on 4 will be funded by casino gaming and sports betting expansion. Like very, very small.
Colorado too. Colorado, had their ballot question built around water. Right? It was like,
Yes.
water. I don't remember the exact language, but it was focused as a revenue raiser for some very specific, public work. Whereas in California, I think Proposition 27 built all the messaging and the earmarking around homelessness initiatives. Do you think that was a mistake? Or if you could go back and pick a different beneficiary of the tax revenues, what would have made the most sense to avoid, any of the criticism? Because I think homelessness was a perfect beneficiary to sort of galvanize support in California. But it's a very unique approach, because in most states, Florida, the ballot proposal was Florida education champions. And in many states, the lotteries support sports betting as an initiative to raise money for statewide public education. Was the homelessness message part of the reason why it didn't get that much support when it really should have?
So it's actually, Daniel, that it's not so much to the message. They could have chosen anything. And homelessness is obviously a huge deal here in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and a lot of them. But Daniel, it wasn't so much that they chose they phrased it under a topic like that. It's that I think they would have been much more successful if they just said, this is legalizing online sports betting. They should have just said that. This is in California. I think people looked at that and they go, this is not going to be enough. So the most aggressive possible revenue to the state, it would just be if they had the best possible rollout, the revenue raised would be less than 0.5% of the annual California state budget. It is just not enough for a huge crisis that has been here for decades. So I understand, obviously it's a good, it resonates well with voters, but I think voters saw that it was framed very well by its opponents, that they saw it was really kind of just disingenuous. This is not some benevolent campaign to help homelessness. This is a way for sports books to continue their business. So you have that. I think people thought it was, instead of in other states where these things worked. Oh, okay, I want roads in Arkansas. I want water in Colorado. I want education. Georgia's an example where it was the education lottery, Tennessee, Florida. I want all these things. Californians, I think, read between the lines. And this was also, again, you look at those states specifically. Arkansas did not have a galvanized opposition group. Colorado did not have a galvanized opposition group. California did. California had a very strong, well-organized, well-financed opposition group. They frame this and go, hey, this homelessness initiative really isn't about homelessness, it's about sports betting, and it's not going to really do much as what they say. I think voters were turned off by that. I thought they went, oh, this is disingenuous. They was framed that way, so they went against it. Also in California, we have similar things here too. This one I'm not an expert on, but they have another proposition which is about medical clinics and all this, and it's very confusing about what they can and cannot diagnose and serve, and just so Californians are kind of used to, they're afraid they're going to be duped. So you have that, and then to tie into your other point, 26 I think got lumped in with 27. Whenever you have two things that seem similar, people got confused. That hurt them as well, and plus there wasn't the pro 26 campaign was much smaller than the anti 27. The 26 groups, the tribes, didn't spend hardly any of its supporters on pro 26. Everything went to anti 27. That got lumped down, and it brought everybody down. It ended up being mutually assured destruction $600 million later.
In the legal profession, we have a concept called juror nullification, where despite all the evidence pointing in favor of one outcome, the jury goes the other way. And that's basically juror nullification. Could we potentially, I'm with you. The polls, the endorsements, the op-eds, everything's pointed in one direction here. And then you look at the money. The money tells the story. Could you foresee any scenario in which Californians approve sports betting because no amount of polling that's done could ever capture, such a broad mass of people that are going to be turning out to the polls. California has a population size of 40 million. Is there any argument that these polls do not align with how the voting may actually unfold, given the size of the likely voting public and the fact that the ballot initiatives aren't top of the ticket stuff? As the governor of California, races, statewide races, the ballot proposals usually appear further down the ticket or on the ballot. Do you think there's any scenario in which we could be in for a surprise?
There always is, but it's just, I doubt it. Again, you brought up the 2016 election. Clinton was, let's say, was 5 points favored and all that, and there was polling errors, and it was also odd. She won the popular vote significantly. It was just she now a couple states. The polling is so bad, Daniel. It's to be 25, 30% favorability is just so bad. Again, you need every possible and that's impossible for every undecided voter to go one way or another. You can always be surprised if there's differences of weird turnouts, or you get certain areas. Typically in sports betting, more urban areas are more supportive, more rural areas are less supportive. Do you get a huge turnout? Here in Los Angeles, there's a big mayoral election. Does that galvanize people? Do you get voters? Again, all possibility, but it's just, these are high quality polls. It was the University of California, Berkeley, Los Angeles Times polls. These are big time polls, and they are just so bad. It is so bad. So, and then also, again, what you said, what money talks. When DraftKings and FanDuel and BetMGM and everybody is pulling the ads, there it is, and it's not, they're not pulling their ads because they're up by so much. They view it as that they're done.
What I would have done, and no one asked me for my opinion on this, but I think one of them, I wouldn't call it a mistake. I think it's normal to expect a well-funded campaign tied around online sports betting, which has succeeded on the ballot in every state where it has ever been conducted before. I think there's a reasonable expectation that you're going to win when the numeric threshold for approval in California is only a simple majority. In Florida, you need 60%. But what I might have done, had I been sort of the czar of how to craft a ballot initiative, I would have involved in-state stakeholders to be part of the entitlements. I mean, the messaging around these big out-of-state corporations with questionable business practice, all of it is just total BS, because these out-of-state corporations also have gaming licenses in so many other states and have been selected by state lottery commissions to be the exclusive sports betting operator. They don't have questionable business practices. It's all labeling, because if they had questionable business practices, one, they wouldn't be licensed in other states, and two, states like New Hampshire and Oregon wouldn't be selecting DraftKings to be their online sports betting operator. But again, it's all in the marketing. What I would have done was figured out a way to include the state's other gaming stakeholders, and in particular, I think the professional sports teams. California has 19 teams.
Yeah.
You go through the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, more than any other state. That's customers and voters by the millions. If you were to aggregate all the people who attend live sporting events, watch live sporting events, are customers and interface with the various team websites, you could have created sort of a firewall against any negative advertising centered around out-of-state companies. If you included the teams, if you included horse racetracks for the online, everybody knows that even if you have 30, 40 operators, the ones that are going to dominate are going to be the big companies like DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM, Caesars, Fanatics. I guess the market access deals would work a little bit differently. If you were able to include all the teams and have them vigorously support an online sports betting initiative, could that have been a differentiator in your view?
Absolutely. It's entirely, I use this word, cautiously, but there was an arrogance and there was an ignorance about this approach, where they did come in, did not work on the ground with stakeholders. Absolutely. Sports teams are a great example, but they could have worked with somebody. They could have gotten that Californian, hey, Californians approve this. Instead, they got a couple of tribes, which were very small and politically unconsequential in the big scheme of things. Again, noting these smaller tribes were willing to do this deal with DraftKings and FanDuel because they wanted a leg up. These are the smaller tribes. So they don't have the power. They come in and they just think, okay, yeah, we'll spend a lot of money. We will just blanket the airwaves with advertising. Everyone knows who we are anyway. We'll be able to do this. But you're absolutely right. That's an important marketing thing they did. They did betray them as out of state. And as you know, with these ballot measures, people are not looking at things analytically. They're looking at things emotionally. They're looking at things through an ad they saw or whatever. There's not a lot of really deep analytical consideration of what this actually means. Nobody in California who saw that ad saying about the corrupt out-of-state companies, well, they probably were, if they were influenced by that, they probably didn't think, well, DraftKings has been licensed to operate in 20 states, including several. Like they're not thinking that way. So absolutely, I think it's huge. So yeah, the sports teams would have been a good one. It's a good example too. In Florida, where I lived, I think they really, it's a different situation, but it was difficult. They didn't even get enough signatures, but they could have done something more. I have Buccaneers season tickets. I live in Tampa. I didn't see anybody out there positioning me to get me, to try to get it on the ballot. That would have been a great example, the sports fans. So that, I think those are all big factors with it. But it's also, Daniel, I think maybe the most important thing we're looking at is that these tribes, and again, I think it's a good critique. Let's look at what they think. But it's just what we know for a fact is they portray this as an existential threat to their livelihood, to their people. Literally have used those terms. So they are going to fight it as hard as they can. DraftKings and FanDuel and all of them needed to understand that better, that they were going to have an incredibly powerful opposition group. And they, instead of working with them or anything else with it, they have now gotten them even more fired up. And if and when DraftKings comes back in 2024, which they have every indication that they will, the other sports books, the tribes have said, we will be right there to fight you again. So 2 years from now, are we looking at another $600+ million wasted for something? Or are we going to have to get these California stakeholders on board? I am fairly confident that this will never happen in California if and until these groups, specifically the tribes, support it. We will not have online sports betting from the major commercial operators in the state of California until these groups become on board with it.
Well, it's not just on board. The tribes have made declarations of victory that going forward, these online sports betting companies have to recognize that they're subservient to the California Indian tribes. Well, what does subservience mean? And what does that mean going forward? If this was a draw and they both lose, why do the tribes have the upper hand? Because when you think about it, collectively, these online sports betting companies that operate nationally and in some cases internationally are flush with revenues from in-person gambling, online gambling, and even online casino. Collectively, they could pass the hat around and outspend the tribes who only have in-person casino-style gaming. How are the tribes able to can they continue to win the war of attrition? What's going to change looking ahead to 2023 and 2024? What has to change? And what does a consensus around sports betting look like in California?
I think the tribes, I think they can start winning this war of attrition if it continues again. Now, do they come back with even more money 2 years from now and try it again? Possible. I have a lot of being here, talking with these people, talking with the people here, talking with the tribal leaders. They are able to fight this, and they will, everything with it. So, you never know, but I think we have to understand their influence. We have to understand really their power with it. When you mention that too, yeah, it's not so much on board. It is, they've used that term. One relationship would be as tech providers, and then even then possibly as a scenario, which I don't know if they would go with, but then they are the skin, or they are rebranded under tribal casino names. So instead of, we could use DraftKings tech platform, but instead of seeing DraftKings, you see, a tribal casino, you see Pachanga or something like that. And they're not going to do that. That's just one scenario with it. So how do we look at this? But it's also with it at these panels, talking with them too. If you get the right deal, they would be open to listening to it. I also understand that one thing we have to look at is, yes, the tribes fear online casino gaming, but it's also much as they fear online casino gaming. If you're online casino gaming that they don't control, if as online casino gaming becomes more and more common, it's going to take a while, but it is slowly expanding. I think it will get to more states if and when that becomes the future. And I think it will, just because of how people my age and younger use technology. The future is going to be online. These tribes are not going to be the last state standing without online casino gaming. They're going to eventually adapt it. They want it under their terms.
I have the solution, Ryan. You just raised the issue of controlling iGaming or online casino gaming. Maybe go forward in 2023 or 2024. I guess 2024 is the year of the general election. Why don't you expand? First of all, have a legislatively referred ballot measure that has the support of the tribes, the online sports betting companies, the horse racetracks, and without any opposition from the card rooms. Not that they really matter as much, but why not give the tribes exclusivity over iGaming, which is really what they were afraid of, and have a more sort of equitable, competitive marketplace for online sports betting and allow more competition within that sphere, while give the tribes exclusivity over the very thing they have exclusivity over on the ground right now. Would that be a possible solution?
Wouldn't that be great, Daniel? In Connecticut, tribal gaming state, after, they have a solution now where DraftKings and FanDuel have online casino gaming there as partnership with the two major tribes there. The lottery also has online sports betting, though not online casino gaming. And then they also have 15 retail sports books at different, their OTBs got a piece of the action. They put them in some disadvantaged communities in Connecticut, all that. Every single stakeholder in Connecticut pretty much got at least a piece of the pie. They got something. The two big tribes got the biggest prize, which is online casino gaming. DraftKings and FanDuel get a partnership. The lottery gets something. Bet Rivers get something. What a great scenario. And that took 5 years plus in two different gubernatorial administrations. It was incredibly difficult. And there was even a point to the very end that it was hard. There was a concern that it might fall apart. These things are incredibly complex. So yes, we have a roadmap there. We also have Michigan, which has a state where it's tribal gaming, but also commercial gaming, also got a piece of it. Arizona, the sports teams got a piece of it, and the tribes got a piece of it. You can find these deals. They exist. There is negotiations. There's mutually, we had mutually assured destruction earlier. There is mutual benefit. Daniel, I would love a scenario where the tribes get online casino gaming, DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, everybody gets in their sports betting. Maybe give the card rooms a couple retail sports books, and or something like that, which is a smaller piece of the pie. But at least they can say, we got a win, we got another option there. Everyone can get a little bit of something that they want instead of everyone getting nothing. It's kind of a very basic, rudimentary look at game theory, and that's kind of what we're looking at here as well. We've had some great conversations over the years about just policy, legislation, getting all this done. There are common sense, realistic, logical solutions. And unfortunately, in politics and in life, that's usually not how it works out.
Well, look, I think you've raised a great point. I mean, what's the motivation here? Is it that we win and everyone else must lose? Or we win, we get what we're really after, and we allow other stakeholders to have some role, limited role with respect to online sports betting? I think from the tribal perspective, anything that grants an entitlement to the California card rooms is a non-starter. So how do you overcome that objection? But I believe that your point about the Connecticut model is a roadmap for potential use in California. And I would add to that you really have two kicks at the can between now and 2024 on the issue of sports betting legalization. Everyone is thinking ballot initiative. Let's do another signature gathering campaign and put it on the ballot. Well, the California legislature also has the option to legislatively refer a ballot measure to the electorate, and it could be done, at least the legislative piece of it can be done during the 2023 legislative session. Put it on the ballot for November of 2024, have the tribes, have the online sports betting companies be behind it, have a consensus, and avoid this profligate spending that would inevitably arise from a competitive, dual ballot initiatives. If you had a legislatively referred ballot measure that has the support, you can start the legislative process next year and have everybody on board and really have clear skies ahead. Or alternatively, as I've written previously, the legislature could pass a statute authorizing sports betting in California. I'm of the view, based upon some legal analysis that I've done, and I wrote a law review article about this, that the California Constitution's prohibition against casinos of the type currently operating in Nevada and New Jersey has no applicability to sports wagering. And the legislature has the autonomy and the freedom to authorize sports betting by statute without putting it to a vote of the electorate. Of course, if it doesn't have the support of all the stakeholders, you're going to end up in litigation. But if you did have a consensus around that issue, you could bring this to the legislature as early as 2023, pass a statute with the support of all key stakeholders, and Governor Newsom could sign it into law and have your first bets placed before the end of calendar 2023. It is possible, but it requires consensus. And if you have a consensus, you have two kicks at the can next year and in 2024. What do you think about that?
That'd be great, wouldn't it? They have tried legislatively. They tried 2 years ago to get kind of a grand compromise through the legislature. It built a little bit of momentum, but they were not able to get all the stakeholders on board. I think it's now unfortunately, Daniel, this has made it harder for those groups to come together. Unfortunately, it has been used very strong. There's been poisoning the well. There's just been more animosity than even before. I'd love that everyone can get together with it and get this done. I'll also note that in California, gambling is really far down on the list of issues, just overall with it. I think Connecticut, an example, is because those tribes are so politically influential as well. The two, the Mohegan and the Massatoga Pequot, are so politically influential. They're also some of the biggest. Their two mega casinos are two of the biggest economic drivers in the state of Connecticut. They are by far and away the biggest economic drivers in that region of the state. So that's part of why they get more political oxygen than they do. In California, there are so many issues going on with it. It makes it a little bit harder because you need that political oxygen for something that's going to be this complex, something that's going to be this, emotional. It's just going to be that much harder to get it done. California does meet all year rounds in their legislative session, one of the few states that has full-time legislators or legislators. But it's just, again, there's so many different things going on with it. It's going to be hard to get that done.
Are there any legislative leaders in either the Assembly or the state Senate that can play an influential role in bringing the stakeholders together? Because they've been hands off this year since the proposed ballot measure took the tribes by surprise in 2021. The legislature hasn't even attempted to push through a bill around sports betting. Is there anyone in the legislature with enough gravitas or enough power to sort of, craft a grand compromise here?
Possibly. I think it's going to have to take a new generation of leaders. I think that the original guys who had backed it, that was their shot. And I think the defeat in the legislature, then it was very much, okay, well, we lost, the bill got defeated. Then we're like, well, we'll give it to the voters. We'll wait. We won't deal with it again. And now that these are, headed towards defeat, I think you're going to have to look at a new generation here. And off the top of specific names, I do not know right now in the legislature who might step up or who had, with that. But it's possible. It would be there. And it does take that. Brant Iden, we all know in the gaming industry, is an example in Michigan where it was almost a singular focus for him. Almost. He was busy with it, but he made that a huge priority getting this done. He also had a very powerful chairmanship as well, which is a big deal with it too. So not only do you need somebody who has to make that a big focus, who has to use their political cards, everyone has their political oxygen with it. They have to be willing to use that, prioritize that, and be in the right positions. And then you have to run into spots where there isn't anybody else with power who is against this. We saw it in Kentucky. We saw it in Georgia. Even though in those states there was majority support from the Republican Party, which controls the legislature in both those states, there was one or two people in influential chairmanships who were able to kill sports betting bills in recent legislative sessions. So you see that same thing there. But in California, you have that, and then you have, again, the tribes are going to be lobbying very hard. You have the card rooms, which also have their defenders, which also want to see anything they want to stick it to the tribes or anybody else if they don't get a piece of the action. So it just adds all of that and just makes it very difficult in Sacramento, in the state capital, to get this done. It's possible. It's just very difficult.
What about the California lottery? I mean, the way that the California lottery implementation law was written, the lottery could create, games that constitute lottery games. Is there any potential for the California lottery to inject itself into this debate and want a piece of the pie? Or are they not like the lotteries of other states? In other states like New Hampshire, Georgia, West Virginia, Tennessee, they're powerful. You don't really hear much about the California lottery's interest in sports betting. In fact, it's been dormant. Do they play any role going forward?
They could, but yeah, there's just been nothing really involved with this. They didn't come out for the propositions. They didn't really seem to actively pursue a role. Even like a state like Louisiana, where theirs was a very kind of commercial operator friendly. Louisiana has a very strong casino industry. Their historic riverboat casinos or whatever, and that legacy and everything. They have a land base, all that. With their sports betting, the lottery got a piece of the pie, but it was kind of just a small one, but they still were involved with it. California, the lottery just has seemed not to be too interested in sports betting, which is kind of interesting in itself. It is the largest lottery in America. It's one of the largest lotteries in the world, mostly just because of the population. Yeah. It is interesting. Other states, the lottery is a very aggressive player. They're a very strong political influence in a lot of states as well. California, and I have to look into it, it's a good question. They just really have been a kind of an afterthought here.
Well, I've taken a look at it. If the California lottery wanted to emulate the Delaware style, sort of parlay type sports betting and have cards at retail outlets, they could legally do it. The only prohibition built into the Lottery Act is that they can't have lottery games that are built on casino themes like craps, roulette, and themes involving dog racing, as long as it's a game of chance and fits the definition of a lottery, which is predominantly a game of chance. And maybe that rules out sports betting because most legal analysts, including myself, and most authorities have concluded that wagering on the outcome of sporting events involves or entails more skill than it does chance. But the parlay games where you have to pick multiple games correctly in order to win, that is a lot closer on the continuum to a game of chance. And it's possible the lottery would be able to follow the lead of Delaware and have something like that as a placeholder until the parties can get together and enact online sports betting. But in the end, that doesn't really amount to a big handle. What this is all about ultimately is control over what could be a $40 billion annual handle that's powered mainly by online sports betting. So let's, before we leave California and take a quick journey across a couple of other states, let's crystal ball this. Where do you see this ultimately ending up? Will there be legal sports betting in California approved by 2025? And if so, what will it look like?
If it's by 2025, it would take a really extreme big compromise that I just don't see happening. I think though it does happen eventually. I think as the proliferation goes across the country, California is not ultimately going to get left out. They will have to do something with it. But 2025, I don't think they're going to. This, Daniel, it was so bitter. It was so rough. The strategies were so tough. It was so many bad things, or so many mistakes happened. So many errors happened in this process. I think it's going to take more than 2 years to clean up the mess, to clean up the hostilities, to clean up all that. I think it's going to take just a while for these. There's wounds here. This was a very difficult process. So I don't think it happens in 2025. I think it could be 2030. But it's going to take a new generation of leaders on both the gaming side, the tribal side, the government side, all that. I just don't see it happening right now. There are too many entrenched obstacles from happening at the moment. Yeah, we could be surprised. Connecticut took 4 or 5 years, two governors' administrations, and then one day they said we had a deal. Well, maybe that happens. I think it's just going to be that hard.
Well, I experienced Connecticut firsthand. I testified in the Connecticut legislature at a time when the 2 tribes of that state were insistent that any allowance of other participants in sports betting would violate their compacts and memoranda of understanding and lead to the suspension of revenue sharing payments that the tribes were obligated to make. And the tribes pivoted within 1 year from insisting that they had exclusivity to now allowing the lottery to have a seat at the table. And then, indirectly allowing Sport Tech to have a seat at the table by virtue of their relationship with the lottery. And now you see these in-person retail sports books at outlets throughout Connecticut that are controlled by Sport Tech. And now you have Rush Street Gaming as an online sports betting operator, as an agent of the Connecticut lottery. So maybe there's a lot to be said about emulating the Connecticut model if you can build it out to include iGaming and grant the tribes exclusivity about the very thing that they've been afraid of losing their monopoly over casino gaming, because once you open the door to a little bit of iGaming, then the momentum will be irreversible. But if you can nip it in the bud and address both of them in one fell swoop through a legislatively referred ballot initiative or a legislative statute that has the backing of all the key stakeholders, then why not? I'm a little bit more optimistic than you are, because there's so much money being left on the table. Not only have the tribes and the online sports betting companies been spending close to $500 million on one campaign, but every year, every month, without retail and online sports betting is tens of hundreds of millions of dollars of opportunity cost lost. And if you were to project that out a couple of years, you're talking about a real loss to all the stakeholders measured in the billions of dollars. I see wiser heads prevailing and a deal being struck. I don't know what it's going to look like, because they have to overcome a lot of emotional and open wounds at this point. But failing that, I would think that maybe the involvement of the professional sports franchises and the economic might that they bring could be a potential game changer in 2024. But I think the right way, the smart way to do this is through an agreement rather than through another battle.
100%, Daniel. But again, this is, we know I keep on using that term, mutually assured destruction. We see it there with it, and sometimes cooler heads do not prevail. So I hope so. And if we did get that legislator on board, if you get all the major stakeholders on board, that thing is going to cruise. If it even had to go to a ballot measure, the grand compromise we talk about would still pass with 55% or more of the vote if it had everybody on board with it. Imagine if you had, instead of $600 million split down the middle and different things with it, but we had $600 million all yes. That would cruise. Voters would approve.
They don't even need that much. They won't even need that much.
Exactly.
I think the real battle is at the legislative referral, because even though the population has to approve it by a bare majority, to get a legislatively referred constitutional amendment onto the ballot, you need 2/3 approval in each of
Yeah.
the state Senate and the state assembly. And the card rooms, in my view, have a lot of political might themselves and may be able to negate the 2/3 approval being met unless they're cut
Yes.
in for some part of the deal. So it's not necessarily clear sailing by having a legislatively referred ballot measure. The easier way to do it may be through a legislative statute where you would only need 50% or a majority
Right.
of the houses in both chambers. Again, there's a lot of game planning and speculation as to the possibilities going forward, but I just can't imagine that the number one potential market, the holy grail of sports betting markets in the world, is going to be sidelined for several more years, maybe through and including 2030. It's incomprehensible to me that these stakeholders would leave all this money on the table when there's a deal to be had, and the deal could involve iGaming, which would bring even more money and more revenues and just be such an enormous windfall for the Indian tribes that I think they should be welcoming of that possibility where they get exclusivity on casino and are more amenable to an equitable distribution of online sports betting, which is, as New Jersey has shown, the iGaming is the biggest piece of the economic pie.
Daniel, we can help with it.
Okay, what are you hearing about Texas? Florida's in court, so we'll spare you Florida analysis, but the legislature in Texas, the session begins early next year. What are you hearing about the prospects for Texas?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that's interesting with Texas is that their lieutenant governor, by both statute and precedent, has extreme influence over the state Senate. Typically, it's a symbolic position or has very little influence. In Texas, the lieutenant governor is incredibly influential and basically runs the Senate similar that a speaker does in most houses in most other states. So Dan Patrick is on the ballot, and this is an important thing with the ballot preview. It has become kind of like a Fox News cultural conservative champion and all that, as he's trying to boost his own political thing with it. And so he's used this as an anti-gambling platform, and he's effectively vetoed any efforts to get anything moving from that. He is a huge roadblock. He will most likely win Tuesday's election, so that is going to be difficult to overcome him. Interestingly enough, Greg Abbott, the governor, is also running and is also favored to win, has really been warming up to legal sports betting. To your point, you brought up the teams when we were talking California. Jerry Jones, a lot of very influential Texas teams have been big proponents of it and been some of the leaders in a state that has no casino gaming. So the sports betting, to have all them there, they are in Texas. These sports teams are even much more influential. Texas is so sports crazy with it. You have a lot of leaders. You have Tillman Fertitta, owner of the Houston Rockets, who's also a Golden Nugget as well. You have a lot of influence from there. So yes, I think in Texas, if it was just up to the Texas legislature, that would pass pretty easily. I think it would pass with 2/3 majority in both houses. It would be overwhelmingly supported, legalized sports betting with a big influence, either run through the teams or what have you. The biggest problem, though, is Dan Patrick, lieutenant governor, president of the Senate, who can effectively end any effort to get that done.
Well, we'll tackle Texas in a future episode. There's a lot going on in Texas. There are so many issues. We haven't even approached the session yet. So tomorrow, or maybe today, depending upon when this episode is released, big decision day in California. All signs point to Proposition 26 and 27 failing. And we go back to the drawing board for 2023, 2024, and beyond. Ryan, it's always a pleasure to have you on Conduct Detrimental. I can go on with you about a multitude of topics. Bruce Springsteen, by the way, I understand.
Oh, yeah.
You're a fan.
Absolutely.
You like the Rising. We'll have you back to discuss Bruce, Texas.
Good.
And
yes.
Enjoy Los Angeles, and we'll be back in touch and follow up with you soon.
All right, great. Anytime, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, my friend.
A little bit of business. Our podcast sponsored by Themis Bar Review, the top bar prep company in the galaxy. Dan, last episode I mentioned, if people wanted to get the right discount code, just reach out to me directly. And some of you decided to take me up on it. Listen, if you reach out to me and you ask me about Themis, that's a direct way to my cell phone and probably to my heart. So if you have a question about Themis, you're trying to get the right discount code, trying to save us a few bucks, certainly we are the right show to do. We have our special discount code, but just reach out to me and I will hook you up. Okay, Dan, for Dan, myself, the Conduct Detrimental family, big thanks to Mike Lawson, our producer extraordinaire. And we will see everybody next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.